Have you ever dwelt on how awesome and how extreme our God is? I mean, being extreme and over the top is actually what makes him God in the first place. Good morning. I'm Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisney, Illinois, with your thoughts for Friday. We've considered some passages this week that describe how extreme God is, and especially in his blessings to his people. But when the Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 3 to these people that he has pastored for probably 3 years or so, he is overwhelmed by the God that we serve. And he writes these words in Ephesians 3, verses 19 and 20. And to know the love of God, which passeth knowledge, that you might be filled with all the fullness of God. Now unto him that is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us, to him be glory. I love the way that Paul is saying here, he's actually bowing his head and praying this prayer for the people at Ephesus. And in this prayer he says, I want you to know the love of Christ. That is the love that God has for us, or the love that God has for this world, he said in John 3:16. Because it caused the Heavenly Father to sacrifice his only Son on a rugged cross to pay for the sins of unworthy people like you and me. And right here he says, I pray that you would know this love. And then he goes on to say, which passeth all knowledge. What Paul is saying is that we could gather some smidgen of that knowledge, but a complete understanding of God's love for us is not really possible. Sometimes we are overwhelmed by a mother's love on this earth, the way that she sacrifices for her children. We see her care for their every need, and oftentimes she gives up her own needs, her own wants. Or you'll see a mother sitting and rocking her baby all night long in a chair because the baby doesn't feel well, and she wants to comfort them. But the love of God surpasses all knowledge. It is too great for our comprehension. In verse 20, he goes on to say and describe God, him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. We're reminded of the passage we read in Jeremiah 33, where he says, you call unto me and I will answer you and show you great and mighty things which you don't even know. Here, these two adverbs are describing what God can do for us. First of all, exceedingly, which means extraordinarily or exceptionally or extremely, as we have talked about this week. He talks about abundantly, which is copiously, profusely, lavish in its quantities. God is able to do all these things exceedingly and abundantly. And this is how much God goes above and beyond all that we ask or think, he says. You know, I feel like sometimes my prayer requests are too selfish or perhaps too lavish. You know, we ask for too much out of God. And yet he says here, he is able to do even more than we could even ask or think. God can do exceedingly and abundantly above that. This is our extreme God. And he says, this is according to the power which worketh within you and me. This extreme God, with all of the abundant love and abundant works, dwells within us by his Spirit. And that is where he wants to do his greatest work. I hope that we realize that today. Paul ends the verses by saying, and to him be glory. Shouldn't we be glorifying this extreme God in our everyday lives, in our prayer life, in our testimony, in our walk, certainly in our hearts? Because we know that he has a love that is beyond any kind of understanding that we might have.